So I'm here with Clark Gallup in Westby, Wisconsin, and Clark was one of the first broadhead collectors that I ever met. When I learned about the American Broadhead Collectors Club, ABCC, and I joined I think it was 1987, and I went to the Aurora annual meeting in Aurora, Illinois, and Clark was standing there with Bill McCrary and Larry Whiffen, and I think it was Tony Capazzo. And that was my first introduction to Clark. But we've talked several times over the years, but this is, I think this is one of the guys, that I hold up as, he's the real deal. He started hunting with a bow and arrow back when, the Fred Bears were just getting started. So I thought we'd just take a few minutes, maybe 5-10 minutes, and talk to Clark about his life hunting with a bow and arrow. I know he's got some stories of his father and his mother. So Clark, if you can just tell us, your early days hunting with a bow and arrow.
Well, I shot my first deer when I was 10, and that was 1950. And my dad wouldn't let me use broadheads. I had to shoot it with a rubber blunt. When I was 11, the same thing. When I was 12, I got to shoot a broadhead. And ever since then, the deer been in trouble.
When did your dad start hunting with bow and arrow?
In the real early 30s. I've got 2 bull staves here. I don't know what the value is. I was going to ask you about them from Chet Stevenson. That he sent my dad. My dad made a lot of bulls.
So Chet actually sent your dad some staves?
Yeah, 2 of them. They're just almost purple looking. It must be Osage or...
Well, we'll take a look. He was famous for you, but let's take a look at him.
Maybe it was you.
Okay.
But my dad was one of the real pioneers here. And
he hunted with Fred Bear, and you said Fred Bear would come around.
I don't think Fred used to come to the house. I thought he was like an uncle.
Yeah.
And I was probably too young to realize who he was at the time. But my dad never hunted with him, though they were pretty good friends over the years. He sent that one picture he gave to my dad of that bear. I've never seen it in publication, but he's bending over checking for a hole. I always thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. So your broadhead collecting, when did you start collecting broadheads? When did it?
It had to be before the club started. My dad was fletching some arrow, burning some feathers, and I come down the stairs, and he says, look over on the bench there. There's a couple letters I got today. One was from Bill McCrary, and one was from Larry Whiffen. They're looking for them old broadheads. And he says, we ought to tear this place apart. He says, we got to have a bunch of them. We ought to start a collection. And the only head that we found that was old was a last case. And then my dad says, yeah, all them gophers and rabbits and squirrels. That's
You'd shot up all the old heads.
Broadheads went to. But I was in college at the time. I'd been out of high school right after I got out of the high school, I went and joined the Navy. And I was in there 5 years. And then I keep forgetting. My mind, I'll be saying something and my mind just flips off. But now I got a mental freeze. Or
yeah, that's okay. It happens to me. I call it a slick spot, right? I hit those slick spots quite often.
Yeah.
But your dad took you out, got you broadhead collecting. I mean, you really raided his broadheads to get your collection started.
No, we didn't have a broadhead. We had a last case. That was how I started. Yeah. And Bill McCrary, I don't know how, I think through my films. I used to take wildlife films all over the country. And I just lived out in the woods. And most people knew me through my filmmaking. And I think I showed him in Madison. That's how I met Bill. And Bill invited me over to Ron Copine's house. Ron's family was into leather stuff. And there must have been 5, 6 of us there. Tom Gagno and Ron and Larry and Bill. And at that time, the biggest collection was a collection about this big. Probably the Bill's or Larry's. So 2 summers, I didn't go to summer school. And my dad made a list of all the old timers back in the 30s that he knew. And I just tore Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota up. And basically that's how I got my collection. And I never thought about traders, guys that open drawers, just, just so many broadheads. Nope, I don't think I got that one. Oh, here, take what you want. They've known me since I was real little.
Yeah.
So.
So they'd have 5 or 6, and you'd only take one.
I'd take one. There were drawers. I remember this one guy. Fang was a pretty good head back then. It ain't now, but maybe it is a little better now because they ain't making it anymore. But he'd pull a drawer. And it was just hundreds of fangs in there. Ooh, there's one I ain't got. And I'd only take one.
Yeah.
But it's just. I think the biggest thing was our get-togethers down at Clinton.
Right. Clinton, Indiana.
Yeah.
Near Terre Haute.
Yeah. That's where I met Jimmy Ellis. We were friends for a lot of years, still are. But just so many friendships. The club back then was, I had probably 3 people I saved heads for. And I found a lot of good heads. Floyd was my top guy. So if I found 2 heads, one went to Floyd. I didn't think about trading it to anybody. If I had 3, one went to Larry Whiffen. Then Bill McCreary. And that was, the rest of them I felt I could trade them off. But
it was a really different atmosphere back then, right?
It was, yeah, it just, and if you met somebody you liked, I'll tell you, one time I did a lot of elk hunting and muley hunting by myself out west. I think I went out there for 50-some years straight. And mostly bow hunting for muleys and elk, some antelope. But I was driving a Volkswagen, and I could pretty cheap going out there, coming back. But I had, I come through where Wounded Knee, Shadner, Nebraska. There was a guy selling watermelons outside, right on the road. He had like a little shack behind him there. I thought, it was hot. And I'm by myself, and I was usually I took internet. As soon as I get out there, go hunting. And coming home, I'd take all these weird roads, go up through the Indian reservation and just goofing off. And anyway, I thought, man, that sounds good. So I pull over to get half a watermelon there, and I see there's about 4 old timers sitting on a bench there. This is, what do you got in the shop? Got any Indian stuff? The guy says, yeah, I do. So he brings out a box of old hammerstones and a bunch of real crude, busted up stuff. I said, you got any beadwork or anything like that? He says, well, I got something. You'll probably like it. And he comes back, and he's got a ghost stand shirt out of Wounded Knee. And I thought, yeah, don't act excited now about it. And he says,
calm down.
He says, what do you think of this? And I says, what is it? And he says, I said, is that a Halloween costume or what? He said, no, it's out of Wounded Knee, which isn't too far from Shadner, Nebraska. And I says, what do you got to have on that? And he says, how much you got on you? So I take out my billfold. I got $35. That's what I want, $35. I gave him the $35. I didn't care if I had to walk back to Wisconsin. I had a real ghost dance shirt. I leave there and I made it to Sioux Falls. And I'm looking for a phone. I got to find an archery shop. I can probably borrow $10 from somebody and make it home. So I pulled in there, this archery shop. Bedslow, I think was the name of it. Bedslow Archery Shop. And, or maybe that was the guy I got this stuff from. I was in there for 2 hours, just eyeing people up. Well, who the hell should I ask for some money? I didn't know anybody. And I went up to this young kid and I says, hey, I've been out elk hunting and I'm trying to make it back to Wisconsin. I don't have a penny and I'm right on empty. He invited me over to his house, had supper with him, and he gave me $10. I sent him back like 50 broadheads to start a broadhead collection and the $10. But while I was there, we went over to, and maybe this where that bed's low, I can't remember. We went over to an old timer. I told him that I collected broadheads and I'd send him a bunch. And we go over and we knocked on this door, and a guy, real old man, comes out, invited us in. We're sitting there, and he says, go up and would you show them arrowheads you got, them arrows to this guy. He's starting to collect this stuff. He brings down a box, and he takes them out. I'm looking at the shaft, and it says, be careful, I kill. And he had probably a dozen in there, and a bunch of loose heads. And I think I picked up 4 of the big barbed heads and maybe 3 of the others, and then the arrows. And of course Floyd got one, and I didn't know what they were, but it was, now I'm trying to think of what the name of that.
Bowyers and Fletchers.
Bowyers and Fletchers.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that had that on the arrow.
You had it on the arrow shaft.
Yeah, but it said, be careful,
Be
I
careful,
kill. And I knew they were old, but I thought, well, that was pretty neat. But I made a lot of mistakes. My dad was real good friends with the guy. He was the head of Nacita Wildlife Refuge. And back in the 50s, they didn't have a deer season in there, but they had a late bow season after the gun season where bow hunters were allowed in there. And the refuge is basically a mile squares, roads all over. So as far as you could get away from anybody was a half a mile. And the place would just be lined bumper to bumper with cars. But since my dad knew the head guy there, we'd get in his truck, and there was one section, it was 2 miles by 2 miles. We went out right in the middle of it, and that's where we set up. And this guy, at one time in the spring, he would go out, and all the arrows would be laying on right on top of the ground because there was snow when we were hunting, when the season was open. And in his garage, he had like quart jars screwed. The entire ceiling of that garage was solid broadheads in quart jars. And I asked him what he wanted, if they were for sale. He said, sure, a quarter a broadhead. I said, I'll take them all. I got 3 different heads. I got a bodkin, I got a, there were all of them were 3-bladed heads.
Yeah.
I can't even remember now. But I
Hills
know
Hornets, maybe.
Hills Hornets, and what the other?
No Barb's Wickies or anything.
No,
like that.
I mean that was the biggest, dumbest thing. That was funny because another time, I've collected arrowheads, Indian arrowheads, all my life, and there's an old bow hunter, Walt Wilder, shot one of the first deer right after Roy Case had shot the first one, and he was good friends with my dad. And in his house was a frame that had 4 broadheads, or 4 or 5 broadheads, some field points, and some knocks that were all framed. So I go over to him and I says, I'm interested in that frame of them broadheads you got. "Oh, they're not for sale." And I said, "Well, what do you collect?" And he says, "Money." It didn't, money, and it wasn't for sale. And I thought, well, when I was working at this museum, they gave me a bunch of these old brass bells, and his wife collected bells. I thought, that's next time I went over, I took one of them brass bells with me, and they were really old. And in my one tray of arrowheads, I found a $3 gold piece. It was like the size of a dime. And I took that along with me. And I says, I gave the bell to his wife. Of course, that made us buddies. And I took that $3 gold piece. I says, "Would you want to sell that?" He took it off the wall. There were 5 Gus Adkins. I'd never seen a Gus Adkins. I thought that was the coolest broadhead I'd ever seen. And about 3 weeks later, I went up to see Art Laha, and he shot for or was a rep for American Archery Company, and there was a 4-bladed head of American Archery. It was pretty tough to find. In every area it was like that, certain areas. That's why the advantage of the club, there was heads from all over, and that you really got our get-togethers. You'd pull in a lot of different heads. But anyway, I went up there mainly to see that. I ended up staying there for 5 days, and he wanted me to go to Alaska with him while I was in school, so I couldn't. But I sort of forgot what I was starting to.
Yeah, you went to Art Laha. And
yeah. Oh, and he did give me the only walrus killer that was left.
Yeah.
So that was pretty special.
Yeah, he was a cool guy. He doesn't get a lot of attention.
No.
And he's really was a pretty important guy.
Yeah.
And what about Roy Case? Did you get to know Roy?
I got to know Roy pretty good. I know my dad and Roy were pretty close. I used to take Roy broadheads, though he had a fantastic collection, but he didn't have a lot of the new stuff at the time. Because I know he traded me one time that Jim Kinney quiver. That's out about 1950, maybe, late 40s. And at the time, there was 4 broadheads or arrows in there that he signed for me. But since then, every time I went to see him, I'd get him to sign an arrow. I probably got half a dozen Roy Case arrows.
I got one from you a long time ago, the Roy Case arrow signed.
And same with Art.
Yeah.
Every time I'd go up to see him, he'd sign me some arrows. Yeah. And at the time, my dad picked up some pretty good arrows. I know the first time I went to Floyd's, he had a big photo of about a couple hundred people, it looked like, in there, of some archery shoot over in Allegheny, Michigan.
Allegan, Michigan.
Michigan.
That was the first NFAA tournament.
And I'm looking down at all the pictures, and off on the right side, here's a Nubby Pate standing there talking to this guy. What the hell? That's my dad. He's talking to my dad. My uncle's standing right behind him.
That's cool. I've got that picture. I'm going to go home and look for Nubby, and then I'll know that's your dad right next to him.
I've got a picture over there of him.
Yeah.
But
what about Floyd? Tell us a little bit about you and Floyd.
Floyd was like my second dad. I had lost my broadhead collection. That was probably the biggest depressive thing that's ever happened to me. And I went over to tell Floyd exactly that I didn't sell it, that I lost it, regardless how it was. But Floyd broke down, and he later, before he died, he told his son Richard that I was to come over there and go through the whole place, any place I could find a broadhead, but not that I couldn't take anything out of the collection to rebuild my collection. But like I said, Floyd was always my top man. And I think he felt the same way as I felt about him. We were very close.
He was such a good man.
He was, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people know how talented you are. So I'm going to pick the camera up and I'm going to walk over here. I'm going to show some of the artwork that you do. Some of these. Trying to figure out how to do the camera here, but this is just fantastic artwork. And you did that, you said you learned basically self-taught yourself.
Yep, self-taught.
When you were in the Navy,
Yep.
spending all the time on the water.
Right.
And this is one of the originals down here on the bottom. Unbelievable. Well, you're one of those guys, Clark, that I'm always going to look back on and say, I'm glad I got to know Clark Gallup. Anything you want to tell people?
I don't know, I'm not a public speaker. You know, I used to take my movies for pretty much 30 years. I put a 2-hour program together every year. And I took them all over the East Coast and Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. I could never stand up in front of a crowd and talk. I still can't today. But as soon as the lights went out, you can ask me any question about hunting, I'll answer it. I've lived in the woods for 40 years. And, you know, it's just, I'm not a public speaker. And I always, at the end of my films, would apologize that I wasn't a public speaker. But I tried to keep the crowd down to like 200 people. And I had a speaker system. I could communicate back and forth with the crowd, and they all really enjoyed it.
I tell you, there's two people I've met probably in my life that I consider to be what I call the real deal.
Yeah.
You know, Ron Shear was the real deal.
Yes, he was.
He was, you know, a mountain man. You know, he was just born in the wrong century. If you were going to be in the wilderness, or you're going to be on a mountaintop in the Rockies or
Right.
in the wilderness of Alaska, Ron Shear was one of the guys you wanted with you.
Yep.
And I think you know, as far as, you know, hunting with a bow and arrow, whitetail hunting, you know, legend's not even the right word. And, you know, the real deal is,
Yeah.
to me, a better word. You know, you guys are the real deal.
Yeah. That's,
Well, thanks for taking some time with me.
You bet.
And I think it's really important that people get to, you know, a lot of people don't get to meet you and talk
Yeah.
to you. And, you know, now we haven't had a club meeting for a while. And
right.
but I think, you know, now people can get to hear and see who you are, you know, Clark Gallup.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Clark.
Yep.